Big thanks go out to Tywa for supporting today's video via Patreon. While the gameplays aren't doing very well on the channel, I decided to instead go back to some deck techs, as some of you have requested some deck techs from me over the past few weeks and months, and we don't really have a Magic the Gathering set to go after deck techs with at the moment, so I decided to just try and make some fun builds with older commanders. This one of course being the Mimeoplasm, which wants to exile a couple of creatures from the graveyard. It becomes a copy of one of them and puts plus counters on itself equal to the power of the other. As we can see in the artwork, there is a giant T-Rex on the Mimeoplasm's arm, as well as some dinosaurs in its belly. So I decided to go for Sultai Dinosaur Tribal. This is by no means the most optimal version of the Mimeoplasm, far from it, but we do still get to focus on big power and some keywords, which is typically what the Mimeoplasm wants to do. So let's go over the card draw first of all. And with said card draw, we do of course want to be loading up our graveyard as well, because we're playing Dinosaur Tribal, but we've also got a little bit of reanimation in here, as well as the Mimeoplasm needing to see things in the graveyard, so loading up the graveyard will be imperative. Grizzly Salvage good in the early or late game, grabbing us either a creature or a land from the graveyard, as well as loading up said graveyard. Then loot effects, things like Frantic Search and the Thirst cycle are going to draw us 3 cards and likely discard 2. They have different clauses on them, but that's pretty much what all of them say for 3 mana at instant speed. Windfall going to hopefully refill our hand, as well as load up the graveyard with some expensive creatures that we want to make use of from the graveyard. There's some utility effects on dinosaurs as well, with this being a tribal list, so the Runic Armosaur sees activated abilities from creatures or lands that are not mana abilities, and allows us to draw a card. That is not once per turn, so if you're against an opponent who wants to get lots of activated abilities going, then you can draw a hell of a lot from this thing. It either does a lot or does nothing, in my experience, the Armosaur. Curious Altasaur, if you get a lot of dinosaurs in, then each dinosaur that deals combat damage draws you a card. Earthshaker Dreadmore, the sequel to the meme card. This one's actually good though, a 6/6 for 6 with trample. When it enters, draw a card for each other dinosaur you control. So even if you throw this down and only draw 3, it's still a 6/6 trample for 6 mana, which isn't horrendous. Nezahal gets plenty of cantrips for us as well. This one triggers on an opponent casting a non-creature spell, which in Magic the Gathering or Commander specifically nowadays, you're going to see a lot of non-creature spells being cast. Galta Stampede Tyrant hardly belongs in card advantage, but I didn't want to put it in its own category, so this windmill slams all the dinosaurs that are in your hand straight into play, and then you don't particularly care about any kind of wrath, because we can easily make use of the graveyard, as we pointed out previously. Indominus Rex Alpha, an excellent commander in its own right, but this is pretty much in here for a wheel, a selective wheel, and when we do discard creatures with keywords on them, then this will get counters and draw us cards, so like I said, a good commander in its own right, but just a discard outlet pretty much in this list. Then we've got some Power Matters stuff as well, so Garruk's Uprising cares about 4 power or greater to cantrip when the creature enters, and it's a trample enabler as well. Our commander wants to see keywords, particularly trample. If you go put in like 11 plus counters on the Mimeoplasm, but your opponents can chump with a 0/1, then it's not all that much use to you, so this in here for the card draw, but the trample will come in handy as well, potentially. Karuga is another legendary dinosaur. This one draws cards as well. When it enters, draw a card for each permanent with CMC 3 or greater that you control, so going to be plenty of those in this list, I imagine. Worst case scenario, it just puts 5 plus counters on our commander. Return of the Wild Speaker does not allow trample, but it's mainly in here for the instant speed card draw anyway. We should have a decent amount of power when we're playing Dinosaur Tribal, so it should be able to refill our hand before our next turn starts. If for some reason we've got a decent number of dinosaurs in play and we can go wide with one of them, the overrun effect might come in handy, but it's the instant speed card draw that this is in here for. Rishkar's Expertise, a similar thing. We get a lot of card draw and a free spell with Rishkar's Expertise for some reason. Then as well as card draw, we want to be playing around with the graveyard as well, so Tortured Existence. We might not care about exiling a particular thing from the graveyard with our Mimeoplasm quite yet, and in fact sometimes we'd rather just play it into some kind of combat synergy that we've got. So Tortured Existence allows us not only a discard outlet, but to fish creatures that we might want to hardcast into hand. Ripples of Undeath at the very least mills us for 3 at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase. Don't particularly care for the card advantage on this, but if there's something that we're desperate for, then we can always pay the 1 and 3 life. But the self-mill is really why we're trying out Ripples of Undeath here. Rotting Regisaur, obviously a dinosaur that goes well with the theme of the deck. If we want to just discard this and use it for the 7+ counters on our commander, then that is well worth it. But in the early game, we could be smashing face with this, as well as discarding any big creatures ready to reanimate at the beginning of every upkeep, or at the beginning of every one of our own upkeeps, I should specify. Sultai Ascendancy, similar to the Ripples of Undeath. Mill 2, but we can decide if we want to keep anything on top of the library, so it's good card filtering as well as loading up the graveyard. And speaking of graveyard stuff, we've got a few cycling dinosaurs here. There's nothing too incredible. This is only a bracket 2 list, so we're not trying too hard. Keyword on this is Ward 3, but mainly island cycling as well as 6 power if we want to throw that onto our commander at some point. I don't think it's too likely that we're going to want the ward, but we can always select that if we're up against opponents with lots of spot removal. Nurturing Bristleback, that is forest cycling instead, so obviously you discard these straight into the bin. In this case, you grab yourself a forest. The forest and island cycling does allow you to get jewels and tricycle lands and stuff, which is noteworthy. This one in particular enters with a 3/3 dinosaur token, so likely if we're going to exile it from the graveyard at all, it's going to be for the 5+ counters. Titanothrex, the best of the cycling creatures in this particular list. Cycles for 2 to give something a trample counter. We mentioned that trample is likely going to be relevant during a gameplay session with Mimeoplasm. And then once it's in the graveyard, we can either reanimate it as an 11/11 trample, which is no slouch, make our commander a copy of the 11/11 trample, or use this to put 11+ counters on the commander. So depending on the situation we're in, Titanothrex pretty much does everything for us in this Mimeoplasm build. Other good dinosaurs we have include Shifting Ceratops. The protection from blue can often be more relevant than people realise, but its ability to gain keywords on the fly is handy as well. So we have that trample I keep banging on about, as well as reach and haste in this instance. And as ever, we should be keeping an eye on the power of these creatures, because that will dictate the number of plus counters that go on the commander. And 8/8 with trample in this instance. And yet again, a creature that can cycle itself. Should have been in the other category, this one, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. You can use this as a protection effect when you cycle it. Couple of +1/+1 counters, trample and indestructible. Otherwise, it's likely your commander is going to become a copy of this and then get some plus counters on it to boot. Carnage Tyrant, a 7/6 trample hexproof that can't be countered. Pretty hard to argue with stats like that. Ancient Imperiosaur is trample and ward 2. Again, good keywords. It's quite expensive, so this is the type that you'll want to reanimate or have your Mimeoplasm become a copy of. Not likely that we're going to make use of the Convoke, I don't think. This is why it costs so much, because it can be convoked. It's mainly in here for the ward and the trample on one creature. Rampaging Brontodon gets +1/+1 for each land you control when it attacks. Plenty of land ramp in this build, with it being a green deck, and obviously dinosaurs want to swallow up a lot of mana as well. Tyrannax Rex, again really good keywords, even better than the previous one. This trample, ward 4 and haste, as well as toxic 4. I wouldn't have thought the toxic is going to be relevant. You have to hit your opponents 3 times with that. And there's no kind of double strike or anything in the list, I don't think. But again, a really good body to make your Mimeoplasm a copy of. The keywords on this one won't be as relevant with your commander, but there's every chance that you get to hardcast this. Only gets the ward 10 and haste as long as the Tarasque itself was cast, so our commander becoming a copy of this does not get the ward 10 and haste. It does, however, get whenever it attacks, it fights a creature a defending player controls, so if your commander has some kind of indestructible, or it just wants to fight something weaker than it can get blockers out of the way, or commanders with really good abilities, things like that, and it's likely going to be much bigger than a 10/10 in this list. Then it wouldn't be a dinosaur list without Galta Primal Hunger. Very, very likely to be able to hardcast this 12/12 trample for little to no mana. And again, your commander being a 12/12 trample means that it will need 9 more plus counters on it from a 9-powered creature in order to be one-shotting opponents out of the game. Ramp is pretty typical for a green list. Like I said, there's a decent amount of land ramp in the deck, but we do have some synergistic dinosaur stuff as well. So Topiary Stomper is pretty much a Wood Elves, or a Farhaven Elf I suppose. 4/4 trample, can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more lands, and gets a basic interplay tapped upon entry. Wayward Swordtooth doesn't ramp on its own, but if you have a decent amount of card draw and a good few lands in hand, then you can play an additional 1 per turn. Again, can't attack or block unless you have the city's blessing, which is 10 or more permanents in this case. Hulking Raptor has a relevant keyword on it there as well with Ward 2. Not the best thing to become a copy of your commander, but the 5+ counters could come in handy. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add a couple of green. That is really the main reason it's in here, is for the ramp. And then Regal Behemoth, a 5/5 trample for 6 mana isn't great, but you do become the monarch when it enters, and as long as you are the monarch you can tap your lands for an additional mana. Often isn't likely that you're going to be able to keep hold of the monarchy, especially in a list like this where you're not littering the board with tokens, but with big beefy tramplers you should be able to take the monarchy away from your opponents on a turn and then go crazy on your second main phase with all the cards you want to cast. Oftentimes in the late game you'll be able to drop this for 6 mana and then still have like 10 mana left over from your 5 other lands, so worth trying this one out I think. Little bit light on the removal, but it's only a clunky bracket 2 list, so I'm not too worried about that. Drown in the Loch is counter a spell if you've got a decent number of cards in your graveyard, or destroy a creature if you've got a decent number of cards in your graveyard, with the self-mill and discard, looting, wheeling, stuff like that we want to do in this list. Drown in the Loch should do some decent stuff for us. Beast Within is Beast Within. Fel the Profane goes in pretty much all the black decks because it's creature or planeswalker on a land. Then Spitting Dilophosaurus is one of those creatures that isn't terrible for your commander to become a copy of as long as you can dump enough plus counters on it to keep it relevant. You might be missing the trample or something like that, but you're not necessarily going to need the trample as much because when this enters or attacks you're going to put minus counters on your opponent's creatures and those creatures can't block. So worth trying this one out. I think it's just one more means for you to try and get your damage through with the commander or any of your other dinosaurs as well. Thrashing Brontodon, a 3/4 body on a 3/3 can be sacrificed to destroy an artifact or enchantment. And then the Scion of Calamity, 5/5 for 5 mana, doesn't have any kind of evasion unfortunately, but the Myriad should hopefully be able to give someone a hard time blocking, especially if they're not running too many creatures. When it deals combat damage to a player, destroy an artifact or enchantment that player controls. Again, if your commander is a copy of this, then it will make copies of itself and it will be able to hopefully push damage through to other players as well. The copies won't be dealing commander damage, but you will still be getting the chance to destroy artifacts and enchantments at least. And while we're on removal, let's go over a few thematic wraths as well. Grim Gigantosaurus is a 10/10, so once again, another really good body for us. When it becomes monstrous, destroy all artifacts and creatures other than the Grim Gigantosaurus. The monstrosity cost is 10 black and green, but for all the big creatures of power 4 or greater that your opponents control, it costs 10 less, so it's likely that you're not going to pay anywhere close to that amount. So basically your commander becomes a copy of this. It's a 10/10, likely even bigger thanks to the plus counters, and then you pay whatever you pay, 6, 7, 5 mana, 4 mana, 2 mana, depending on the board, and it wipes out all artifacts and creatures other than your commander, making it easy for you to swing through for a lot of commander damage. Couple this up with haste and yeah, you should really be able to surprise your opponents with this one. Cresting Massasaurus, not too good with our commander becoming a copy of it, as it would only be a 4/8. So we really want to be saving this one for hard casting if we can. When it enters, if you did cast it, return each non-dinosaur creature to the owner's hands. Pretty much all our creatures are dinosaurs of course, so we will be using this as a one-sided board wipe, but again, we need to be able to cast it. The emerge cost is relevant on this as well. 7 mana in total, but we do get a reduction on that if we sacrifice a creature. Let's say we sacrifice a 6 power creature, which is more than likely in the dinosaur list. This will cost a blue. We'll get that big creature into the bin, which might be where we want it if we want to make our commander a copy of it, for instance. And then we've got a 4/8 in play, a one-sided wrath, and we've set up our graveyard for reanimation, getting the Mimeoplasm down, whatever it is that we want to do. Apex Altasaur has some cool tech as well, but for now we'll just talk about how when it enters, it fights a creature you don't control, and that continues to chain off because as long as it is dealt damage, it fights another creature you don't control. So obviously in fight, you deal damage to the creature deals damage to your thing, and it carries on until the Apex Altasaur has too many damage markers on it. Unless of course you can give it indestructible, which is exactly why the Savage Order is in here. As an additional cost to cast this, you can sacrifice a creature with power 4 or greater, then search for a dinosaur and put it into play. with indestructible. So like I said before, we can sacrifice any creature into this, which might set us up for another turn, but mainly we want to go and fetch the Altosaur so that it's got indestructible and we can just fight every creature at the table over and over again until they all have enough damage markers on them to be wiped out. Savage Order alone acts as a tutor, of course, if we just want to go and grab some other dinosaur, as does Buried Alive, 3 creatures into the graveyard. Entomb dumps 1 creature, or any card actually, into the graveyard. We're likely just going to go for dinos with that at instant speed. And then the Fauna Shaman can discard a creature and search for a creature. So once again, going with the whole setting up of the graveyard thing. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a goofy Mimeoplasm build. You want to be focusing on ramping and getting yourself into dinosaurs, hard casting them, and then as they get destroyed and wrathed and thrown into your graveyard, you then have the option of either reanimation or then finally beginning to threaten your opponents with the Mimeoplasm when their resources start to dwindle. We're not necessarily in a big rush to get this thing down like we are in a typical Mimeoplasm build. If you get into something like the Buried Alive or something and you can land this for a lot of damage with Trample and Ward or something like that, then nothing to stop you going for that, but typically speaking it's a Dinosaur tribal build first, and then the Mimeoplasm comes swooping in afterwards to eat up all the carcasses. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the revisits to the deck techs. I don't necessarily intend on doing these forever, but you can let me know in the comments section if there's anything that you would like to see. Just trying something a little bit different for a while, whilst all the effort into the gameplay videos aren't really paying off all that much. So hopefully you all enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing more of these in the not too distant future. Massive thank you to the patrons for their relentless support of the channel. I'm TribalKai. Thank you for watching.